Hi, my name is Mark Belash. I'm president of the 2020 Canadian Virtual Music Expo. I'm really happy to be joined by Alan Cross, who's going to take us through his weird vinyl library. Can't wait for this one. Hope you're enjoying. I hope everyone's enjoying their day so far. Lots of stuff still coming up through the day. We have about an hour left. And Alan, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks so much for being part of this.
All right, here we go. I am in my basement bunker. This is my vinyl library behind me, and it comes with a bit of a story. I started collecting records when I was really, really young, somewhere around 10 or 12. The first record I ever bought was Elton John's Greatest Hits, Volume 1. I bought it with my own money for $4.99 at a general store in my small town in Manitoba, and my mother was absolutely furious with me because I was wasting my Star Weekly paper route money on something like a record album by a rock. And she says, "Do you really need that record?" And I said, "Yes, Mom, I do. I still have that record. It's in there somewhere." And every once in a while, I pull it out, look at it, and go, "Yep, this is pretty much where it all started." Now, one of the things that you see behind here is a collection of my personal library stuff that I bought over the years. It's not all here. I left a lot of it at my parents' place, and then my nephew rifled through it and took all the good stuff. So there's some stuff back at my dad's place who says he's going to sell it for big money. And frankly, there's nothing really that interesting in there, at least last time I looked. So I took the records that I really, and they've been traveling with me for my professional career. And then another thing happened. In 1995, CFNY, The Edge, was moving from its headquarters at 83 Kennedy Road South in Brampton to new digs at number 1 Dundas Street West. Now, this was a time when everybody assumed that vinyl and anything analog was never going to be used ever again. Just get rid of it. And frankly, that was the prevailing attitude for a lot of people. The CD was out. We had heard about this thing called the internet. Anything that we're going to ever want will be available digitally somewhere. So why keep those dusty vinyl records around? Now, something about that really bothered me. So a few days before the old place shut up for good, I rented a Ryder truck, backed it up to the radio station, and took as much shelving and as many records as I possibly could. So what you see behind me, in large part, is the old original Spirit of Radio CFNY record library. So if you grew up listening to the radio station between 1977 and 1995, and you remember people like David Marsden or Chris Shepard or Martin Streak or Live Roll Jive or me playing records on the radio, those actual records, the records that you heard, that we played on the turntables from the studio, are here. And I just couldn't let them go to waste. It just seemed to be too much history to let them go. So I kept them. And now I'm glad I did, because vinyl's back, obviously. And I have some stuff here that has never, ever made it to digital. So what I've done is I've gone through the library, pulled out a whole bunch of records. I've got some stacks on the floor in front of me. If you watch my daily Instagram updates, which I do somewhere around 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, what we've been doing is going through my library letter by letter. And we finished things up on Friday, yesterday, with the letter, well, halfway through the letter M. Earlier this year, I did a Zoom thing with a company called Side Door Access. And we had a bunch of people, and I went through my library for about 45 minutes from A to Z. So if you were part of that Zoom event, and if you've been following me on the Instagram live thing or the Instagram stories thing, you may find that there's been a little bit of there's going to be a little bit of overlap, but for the most part, this is stuff that I haven't shown anybody yet. I've been sitting in the basement for a very long time, and here we go. Now I'm going to show you this. Oh, before we start, I have to explain a few things. Now, this is what a record looked like from the CFNY library. We would tape it up with basically cloth tape, duct tape, and the music department would put stickers here with the track listings, and then they'd occasionally put a little bit of, biographical information, and then they would put some comments from the music department, and then they would sticker the songs that we would play like this. See that? There's two purple dots there, and over here you see a single orange dot. That was our coding system. So back in the day, we selected our own records, and we were given a blank sheet, a blank template, and along the left-hand side were a series of letters and codes. And we could play anything we wanted to as long as it was in the order of those codes, which signified certain categories of music. So that's the way it is. We played an A, then we played a double purple dot. Then we would play a single purple dot, and then we would play a B, and then we would play another double purple dot. And that's, we were all in charge of picking our own music. You had to know that library backwards and forwards. There were about 20,000 records in that library at the time. And the whole thing was to create, a pleasing mood with very careful mixes to make sure that you created this really interesting radio program. And David Marsden, the program director, was really, really hard on us when it came to the mood, the flow, the rises and falls, the overall vibe of your show. Really, really important back then. And that's one of the things I miss today, because everything is driven by hard drive playback systems. You don't get to actually physically mix records on the radio anymore. The machine does it, which I think is a little bit too bad. What else can I tell you about that? Oh, yes. So, okay. So a double purple dot meant that this was a big hit. This was a tried and true CFNY song that the listeners loved. And playing double purple dots was a great thing because it was a hit. And what you would have to do, if you can see underneath it, is when you played it, you had to initial it, saying that you played it with the date. And every announcer had their own color, so you knew what time of the day that particular song was played. So this one here is in blue, I think. No, I don't remember what blue was, but I do remember that if it was in ballpoint pen, like this over here, that meant the morning show played it. If it was orange, that oddly enough was the all-night show. Brown, I think, was an evening. I know that red was afternoon drive, and middays were green. So if you played this record, if you played this track from this record, you were not allowed to play it on your show for 3 days. And anybody else in the studio, in the station, could not play this same song on the same day. So there was always a lot of fights to who got the best double purple dots. I mean, the battle over who got to play the Smiths' How Soon Is Now was always a bad one, because everybody wanted to play it because it was a big song and everybody liked it. It just was kind of difficult. But that was the way we did things. And again, we would show up in the control room about 45 minutes before our show, and we would carefully go through the library, record by record, looking for things that we thought our audience would like that particular day. So they would, there'd be a big pile of records on the floor. And at the back of the room were 3 milk crates full of records for A's, B's, and C's. A's were the hot new songs. B's were the up-and-coming new songs. And C's were cool songs, but we really didn't know what to do with them yet. But you had to play a certain number of A's, B's, and C's per hour, along with a certain number of double purple dots and single purple dots. Orange dots meant that you could only play them after 7 p.m. at night, because they were, too heavy, too extreme. Maybe they had bad words in them, that kind of thing. And a double orange dot was a big late night hit, and a single orange dot was a not bad late night hit. So that's how the old CFNY library used to work, and that's how we used to pick our records. Now we can start going through stuff. I want to show you this. This is a copy of Alice Cooper's Love It to Death album. I bought this at a garage sale in Kenora, Ontario when I was working there, and it's still in the shrink wrap. It has never been opened. And I spent 25 cents on this, and I thought, wow, what a bargain. This must be worth phenomenal amount of money. No, it's not. I checked it the other day. The very same thing, minus the backstage pass from an Alice Cooper show I went to. This can be yours for the low price of $2.37. That's the going price for it. So not all collectibles are actually worth anything. This is an Irish band called An Emotional Fish. And the reason I brought this out is because of this sticker here. You see it? It says, if you play it, say it. This was a record industry campaign back in the 1980s and early 90s when they became very concerned that radio stations were playing long sets of music and not bothering to identify the artist or the song for every song in that set. So they started putting these stickers there to remind DJs, listen, if you play this song, tell us who did it. And that's the play it, say it thing. We looked at the art of noise here already. We'll move that along. Here is a double orange dot from the old CFMY library. This was one of the first records I played when I got to the station. It was Bananarama doing the old shocking blues song, Venus. I couldn't figure out why an alternative station was playing this, but Bananarama from the UK, they were a very big, indie alternative band. So we played the crap out of Venus, including the video, which was a favorite of everybody who ever went to see the old CFMY Video Roadshow. Guaranteed we would play that at some point in the first half hour just to get people dancing. Next. I don't know why I have this. Next, the Battered Wives. I saw the Battered Wives open for Elvis Costello on his This Year's Model Tour, and I was absolutely entranced with them. They wore these boiler suits, and they had songs like Lover's Balls, Uganda Stomp, and Daredevil. And what was interesting about the Battered Wives, this punk band with who took a lot of heat for their name. They're glorifying, violence against women. The singer was Toby Swan. You might remember him if you're an old CFMY fan. He was the guy that had a hit with his punk version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. I think I have that record. And the drummer on this band at this time was a guy named Cleve Anderson. A few years later, Cleve Anderson would be the drummer for, anyway, Blue Rodeo. Here is a picture disc. Now, picture discs actually originated in Nazi Germany. Hitler Youth used to get picture discs with Hitler on it, with his speeches. And later, it became sort of a novelty where you could buy. This is a Bauhaus picture disc. You can see there, and it was an interview that they did. I don't know when, but there was this company called Back to Back that released a lot of these things. And the idea was mostly a collectible. You weren't really supposed to play them because, the more you play them, the more the picture faded. But there is an interview here with Peter Murphy and somebody else that I've never heard. Here's something interesting. When the Beatles were around, most of their stuff was recorded in mono. And it was either later, some of it was rechanneled into like fake stereo. So there was a movement a number of years ago to restore the Beatles recordings as they were initially recorded and as they were initially meant to be heard. So I haven't opened this yet, but this is a copy of the Beatles Mono Masters. It's a whole whack of stuff all the way up to, Get Back and Across the Universe, all done in mono. And it actually does sound, I've got it on CD, and it sounds better somehow. You don't have to worry about the left-right stuff. It just comes out of the speakers at you and with this severe, some force. And I can't explain it. But if you ever have a chance to explore mono recordings, do it. Next, I wish to show you this. This is the Beatles Butcher cover. Now, the Yesterday and Today album, they wanted to get away from doing, they were the lovable mop tops and they were so sweet. So when it came to the Yesterday and Today album, they decided that they were going to do something stupid, like, have a whole bunch of butchered baby dolls on the cover with them. Now, this isn't a real one. This is a Japanese reissue, a Japanese replicant, reproduction, a Japanese reproduction that I bought at a record show. But I do have an original. Now, it's not in very good shape. And that's because when the album was originally released, they did send it out to record stores, and an unknown number of records were actually sold. But then Capitol Records and EMI Records freaked out, and they ordered that every record be returned. It had this big recall. And rather than scrap the covers, what they did was they pasted the new cover for Yesterday and Today over the top. Now, after a while, some Beatles fans realized that this thing was just pasted over the top. So if they carefully steamed the glue off, you can see the real cover underneath. So that's why it's in bad shape. It's because there was originally a new Yesterday and Today cover on top of it that somebody steamed off. I actually have a record on the back saying that, or a letter on the back saying that, yes, this was the fact, and this is an original Yesterday and Today record. Kind of cool to have. Okay. Why would I have a Bing Crosby record? Well, that's because these are not the kinds of records that we deal with today. They are called Edison Discs. They're thinner. They're thicker. And Edison Discs, oh boy, they're so fragile. I mean, See what I mean? Sorry, Bing. I'll put that back. That was not planned. Oh dear. But I can't play these records anyway. And the reason is because there were two types of record players. There was the gramophone, there was the phonograph. Those were phonograph records. They were invented by Thomas Edison. And he believed that the needle on a record should track the grooves up and down. Emil Berliner had a different idea. He said that the needle should track the grooves side by side. So you couldn't play an Edison disc on a gramophone, and you couldn't play a phonograph record on a Berliner disc on a phonograph. And after a very long time, it all worked out. Edison's music company went bankrupt, and we basically play gramophone records using the Berliner technique. So I don't have a record player that can play those discs if they weren't broken. Okay, this is cool. Nick Drake. Nick Drake was a very depressed singer-songwriter who came out of the glory years of the British folk revival, or British folk thing in the early 1970s. He gave us bands like Fairport Convention and Sandy Denny and a bunch of others. He was really, really good, but he was also very, very depressed. He was not well mentally, and he ended up dying of an accidental overdose. I think it was 1972 or 73. But over the years, he has become something of a legend, a lost soul. This was really rare. You can see that we wrote that on the back. If you remember a Volkswagen commercial back in 1999 for the Cabriolet, and the soundtrack to that was a song called Pink Moon. That's Nick Drake, and that was the beginning of his revival 30 years after he died. If you like soft singer-songwriter stuff, Nick Drake's got a really, really distinctive voice. He's really, really good. Okay, next. Yes, Charles Manson made an album. He was a failed singer-songwriter before he decided to start killing people. And he actually hung out with the Beach Boys, Dennis Wilson to be specific. And the Beach Boys actually recorded one of his songs. It was originally called Cease to Exist. I don't remember what the Beach Boys called it. But yeah, so Charles Manson actually wrote a song for the Beach Boys, or at least they covered a Manson song, one of their records. And a company called Awareness Records released this while he was in jail. Lots of liner notes. And I'll tell you this, it's a terrible record. He was a terrible singer, a terrible musician, and a terrible songwriter, as well as a terrible human being. Next, moving through, oh, yeah, we have to go to, oh, I've got, okay, well, we'll do this. Back in the day, before the internet, it was really hard to be able to do an interview, especially if the band that you wanted to talk to wasn't in North America. Phone lines to the UK were scratchy, was expensive, and we had the issue of time zones. And it only got worse if you were trying to interview an Australian band who had a new record and you wanted to do, something with them. So what the record companies would do is send out things like this. This is called a record kit. It is for the Midnight Oil album, Diesel and Dust from 1987. And it contains two things. First, there is a copy of the album, so we can play it. Then there was a second disc in here, which featured a bunch of questions and answers. So the idea was that the announcer in whatever city, like Toronto, would ask a question, and then we would cue up the record, and Peter Garrett or whoever would answer what we just asked. So it sounded like they were in the studio with us, or we had gone to Australia to interview them, but no, we were using these records. Now, we did abuse them sometimes. For example, what we might have done is asked an inappropriate question to come up with that paired with a non sequitur answer. It's kind of funny, but we were bored. Next, I showed this past week. I'm going to ask you, please go look this up. Mahir and I Kiss You. That's all I'm going to tell you about this. But I urge you, go check out Mahir, I Kiss You. And don't blame me for what you hear. Another record, we're going to the J's here. One of the first records I ever played on CFNY when I moved there in October of 1986. Third Division, Level Tears Apart, 12-inch. Played it on Factory Records. And from Martin Hannett. Of course, we always had to put the RPMs on the record because some 12 inches played at 45. Other 12 inches played at 33 1/3. And there was a lot of times where we made some really stupid mistakes. If you remember back in the day, we would play the records at the wrong speed. And just like, oh, gee, we're going to fix that. Nash the Slash from Toronto was a big fan of the radio station, and he heard us do this quite a bit. So he released an album called Decomposing, and this is from 1982. There are 4 tracks on this, and they were composed and recorded so that you could play them at any speed, and the track would sound good. You could play this record at 33 1/3. You could play it at 45 RPM. You could even play it at 78 RPM, and it would still sound fine, not glitchy or anything. It would just be faster. And the reason Nash did it is because so many of us were playing the records on the wrong speed. Don't know why I have this. It's a box set of Marilyn Monroe singing. It's a double set. No idea where it came from. If you are a Family Guy fan, everybody can probably sing the opening theme. That was written by a guy named Walter Murphy. Back in the 1970s, he had a major disco hit with a song called A Fifth of Beethoven. I don't know why I have this. It's a disco record. I don't like disco, but I thought, I'm glad to see he reformed. I'm a big Family Guy fan. What else do we have here? Okay, 9 Inch Nails. This is a limited edition double version of the first album, The Downward Spiral, one of my top 5 albums of all time. It sounds very good, by the way, on vinyl. Okay, another bad record. Everybody makes fun of William Shatner and his records. Well, Leonard Nimoy also released a couple of records. This one is from, the date on it, I don't even know, on Dot Records. Anyway, the first track on this is I Love Making Love to You. I've never played it, but I have it. This is interesting. When Oasis first got together, they had a cassette, and it had this design on the front. And that cassette went to Creation Records and Factory Records and a whole bunch of other record labels, as well as to some fans. And it was the demo, the cassette, that got them their deal. This is the vinyl version of this cassette. And I bought this someplace in England for about £12. And it's just a cool little thing to have. It is a bootleg, but I like bootlegs. For example, here's another one. This was Oasis playing at the Glastonbury Festival in 1995. The interesting thing in England is that these recordings are legal. The rest of the world freaks out when they see something like this, but I bought it. I think I bought this at Sister Ray on Berwick Street, and there you go. Okay, this is interesting. These are the Red Hot Chili Peppers. They had an album called Abbey Road. Well, it was an EP called Abbey Road, and yes, that's the zebra crossing down the street from the studios. One of the first bands I ever got to meet backstage was Red Rider, featuring Tom Cochrane. Oh, I should find that other thing too. Hang on, I know that I did. Yes. So I was a big Tom Cochrane fan. Got backstage in the New Root album. I think it's their third album. I got that autographed, and then later on I bought this, The Happy Hooker. Remember Xavier Hollander and your Happy Hooker books? There was a movie. You can see what it was called. The soundtrack written by Tom Cochrane before he was in Red Rider. He's not particularly pleased about it, but there you go. Okay. Oh, look at this. Another interview disc. This one features REM. Again, don't know what's on it. It's from, I don't even know what year it is. But anyway, another back-to-back release. This is from Rough Trade. Back in the days of vinyl, people were always looking to get the maximum amount of fidelity out of their recording sessions. And it was very well known that if you recorded onto tape, you ended up with a certain amount of hiss. If there was a way that you bypassed the tape thing in recording a record, you could make it sound better. So one of the things they did back then was they went back to before the 1950s, to before we had multi-track recording. And what they would do is they would assemble the band together in the studio, and then they would play through everything live, and then that would be recorded immediately onto a lacquer disc. So no tape intervention whatsoever. Now, if you made a mistake, you had to start all over again. You couldn't do any remixing. You couldn't do any overdubs. It was whatever you recorded off the floor was what was recorded onto the lacquer. So, but there was a very big thing for a long time, this direct-to-disc recording. I remember seeing a lot of these in the old Radio Shack catalogs, promising super high fidelity. Let's look at some questions here. Okay, take a break here. I'm just looking at. Okay, how do you choose a record out of the massive collection? It was hard. It was really hard. We would get to the station early to pick the right records for the show. It was a labor of love. Why don't they make double albums anymore? Okay, that's a complicated question because we've moved more or less into an economy where people are interested in playlists and single songs. Artists release albums, they end up, nobody's buying them, certainly not in the numbers that they used to, and they and people only listen to the singles. So, you know, why bother recording all these extra songs if nobody's going to hear them? That's the short answer to a very complicated question. Okay. Oh, well, thank you for, yeah, this is, I don't know who this is from, but it's a conversation. You were one to bring us the greatest music of all time. We look forward to hearing you. Oh, well, thank you. That's very nice. Why are songs so short? Ah, okay. The reason is streaming. People have a very short attention span. If you look at the top 40 from the last 4 or 5 years, you'll see that songs are getting progressively shorter. What was the biggest song of 2019? Lil Nas X, Old Town Road. How long is that song? 1 minute, 57 seconds. Watch the length of those songs. They're getting shorter because people just don't have time, they say, to listen to long songs. So you can imagine how a band like Tool might feel, where their last album had nothing under 10 minutes. It's not, yeah. How many Frank Zappa LPs do I have? You know what? I never really got into Frank Zappa. I think I have 4. I got Shake Your Booty. I've got a live one. I've got, I think I've got 4. And that's really a failing on my part. I should have more Zappa. I mean, everybody should have more Zappa, but I just haven't had the time. I mean, to be a Zappa fan properly, you gotta devote yourself. Right? And I had a friend named Daryl, and Daryl had, God, he must have had 70 or 80 Frank Zappa records, and then there were the bootlegs. He was a Zappa guy. Do I still hang with David Martin? I see him once in a while. Yes, talk to him every once in a while. And that's about it. Okay, just let me show you one more thing. Could be the most important record in my library. This came out as a big box set the other day, and this is the original from my youth. And in January of 1980, I lived across the street from the high school, and everybody would come to my place for lunch. And they also came to my place because they knew I had all the new records. So we came over with that one day in January of 1980, and I put on Rush, new Rush records, because we're all nerdy kids. And side 1, track 1 is The Spirit of Radio. So I pull this out, and I look at the line notes. And right here, under the lyrics, it says, inspired by the spirit of radio in Toronto, alive and well so far. And at that point, I was already thinking of working in radio. And I thought, wow, my favorite band has written a song about a radio station. Wouldn't it be cool to work there one day? Was it 6 years later? There I was. So I think I'm out of time. Thanks to Mark and everybody else here that tuned in. I appreciate it. I do this every day. Alan Cross X, if you want to follow it on Instagram. We do that Monday to Friday, and also follow me at edge.ca and their Instagram account. Hope you enjoyed this. Enjoy the rest of the Virtual Music Fest as long as it lasts, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.